Okay, here's some more stuff on how to use the diminished scale, and with that I mean the diminished scale that we use over dominant chords. So starting with a half note, or also known as the half whole scale. So I've talked about this scale before, so this might be a little bit I might be repeating myself a little bit, but I wanted to dig in more into how you can think of this scale, because some people were asking me about some stuff that I was doing and how I'm using this scale when I'm playing. I remember for me it was really hard to get this scale into my playing because there's so many notes to think of. There's like the flat 9, the sharp 9, the third, the flat 5, so and so on. So there is a way that we can simplify thinking about this scale and how to quickly come up with it, not getting lost in the myriad of notes, as it were. So what we can do, I think most of you watching this understand this idea that a diminished chord on top of a bass note can create a dominant flat 9 chord, and this is how we most usually use this scale, is as a dominant chord. So if we have a G7 and we add, it's just stacking thirds, right? If I add another third on top of that, the flat 9, if I remove the root, then we have a diminished chord. So I think you all know this, right? But we can use this information when we're trying to play the actual half whole scale. So thinking of those notes is pretty easy if you have a dominant chord, in this case G7. The third, the fifth, the flat 7, and the flat 9. So instead of thinking of it as a scale, we're going to think of those notes and we're going to add an interval to each of those. Let's call them target notes, I guess, in lack of a better term. That's not good. I don't know what we should call them. Let's call them the chord tones. Right, so we're going to add an interval to the chord tones. If I add a second, it would be a major second in this scale, right? So if I'm starting on B, if I add a second, which is C sharp, and I do that to the next chord tone, which is D, the second would be E, next chord tone is F, I'm just playing the scale. But I'm not thinking of it as a scale. I'm thinking of the B, adding an interval. The next chord tone, adding an interval. Might be a little bit easier to think of it that way. You could also turn it around. So I'm starting on the extension and targeting the chord tone. Very common jazz phrase, right? A little bit overused, actually. I think it's that trombone player whose name escapes me right now, who played that lick famously. Somebody might comment, there's a famous solo with a famous trombone player. He uses that lick a lot, and just can't think of his name right now. He's by far the most famous jazz trombone player, I think. Anyway, moving on. The next interval will be a third, but if I add a third to this note, I'm just playing the arpeggio. it's a little bit redundant. Can I add a major third? No. Or I could, but I mean, it's not in the scale. So let's not do that. Now it gets interesting. We're going to add a fourth. And I think you've heard me, if you listen to my videos, you've probably heard me play this. It's one of my favorite licks. Sorry, I got new strings. So the chord tone is B, adding fourth with E. Next chord tone D, adding a fourth. F, natural. And then I'm starting over an octave higher. Where I can switch them around. Very fusion-y, hip-sounding sound. Okay, so moving on. The next interval is tritone, right? Which is also just playing the next chord tone, or but still, it's a cool lick. Sounds like the Yngwie Malmsteen tune. So makes sense to look at it, but it doesn't really fit into the category of what we're trying to do here. Now, a fifth I can't play because it's, or again, it's not part of the scale. Flat sixth. Hang on. There it is. Am I doing this right? No, I'm not. Sorry. There it is. I like it. Maybe I should start using that more. So let's try some of these on a loop. The first was just fourths. And then there was the flat six. I have to think about that. I think some of you are saying, some of you are thinking, it kind of sounds like something John Scofield would play. And yes, you often hear people mention John Scofield when we talk about this scale, but it's not very obvious to me that he's actually playing this scale, even though he's clearly incorporated this scale into his playing. But he's not sticking to it. He's kind of mixing it with other things, I think. It's kind of hard to say what he's doing, to be honest. But this kind of sound. So one thing he's doing is often he will approach, this is also not necessarily one of his licks, but I've heard him play this kind of stuff. You will target one of the notes from below. So like, let's say the B from B flat, and then play the fourth. And then the same thing, targeting the D from one half step below. If you do that with a slide, you can get that kind of Scofield-ish sound. And other intervals, so you could do that with the flat 6 too, I guess. I don't play that often. I should look into that. Maybe that could be my next thing. I like that. Where is it? There it is. Let me experiment with that for a while. Yeah, that's something that I could look into more, I guess. So we could play even larger intervals. So major 7th would work. So B to B flat, D to C sharp, F to E, A flat to G. You do that same Scofield trick. You can get some interesting stuff. We're kind of getting, in my opinion, when you start playing these large intervals, it's not really something that I do very often. It gets a little bit, I'm not sure, ridiculous in my opinion to when people play these extreme intervals. It can be cool, and I've heard people do it in a tasteful way, but I'm a little bit careful with like the really large intervals because I want to play something that I could actually sing, I think. But this is a cool thing, like the slide from below to a major 7. Mixing different intervals. So another thing that I thought about is that the note that stands out here is the A flat, right? The A flat is a little bit suspicious, unless it's really a jazz situation and you're going to it's a dominant chord going somewhere. When if you're on a static chord like this, the A flat, if it's like a funk situation, the A flat is going to be a little bit weird. So you might want to avoid that. Because all the other notes can be found in the different blues scales and the kind of... try to throw in the natural, A natural. There's a C there too. I don't know, maybe that's kind of what I think John Scofield is doing. He's using the diminished stuff to create a hip sound, but he's not necessarily a slave under that scale. He can throw in other notes from other scales, or how, I don't know what he's thinking. Like, you would have to ask him. It's just still interesting to be influenced by somebody and try to figure out what you think that they are doing, and then come up with your own ideas. So to recap, this is basically, I digressed there for a bit, but the idea is that you can use the chord tones of a dominant flat 9 chord as a jumping off point to this kind of sounds. So fourths, flat 6. Oh God, sorry, there it is. And the major 7th. everything can be played from a slide from below. So I hope again you found something useful here, and see you next time.